Hey, everyone, and welcome to the Collector Emitter Patreon podcast for April 2024. Apologies for some delays. I have with me Matt Lowery, who we had planned to do this a while ago, and then some. I had posted about it on the Patreon. When we had to postpone everything, a lot of different things came up on my end, but here we are. We found time to do it, and so we might as well just jump into it. So, how's it going, Matt?
Let's jump. I'm good. How are you? I was just telling you a minute ago, the sun finally came out where I live, and so I'm a little bit less grumpy than I've been for the past couple of days, which is nice.
Yeah.
It's nice to feel less grumpy.
Always. And, good headspace to be in to talk about some fun gear and
Definitely
get into the weeds. So the main reason I had asked you if you wanted to come on the podcast is because you do so much with synths and Euro rack and studio gear, all kinds of stuff that isn't guitar into pedal into amp. And from my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you first started, like, your main gear entryway was through guitar gear, and you've branched out into all these other things.
Yeah, definitely. My journey with all this stuff started 2018, 2019. I had been out of music. I'd kind of quit playing music 4 or 5 years before that. Had spent 15 years growing up playing music, touring in bands. Music was my job for a while, and I found myself in my mid-20s just kind of tapped. And so I took a break, became a dad, and a few years later, really just kind of felt like I had maybe thrown the baby out with the bathwater. That's a terrible analogy to use right after saying I became a dad. But I don't have another one. Anyway, I just really missed playing music. And my entire musical career up until that point had been from the stance of a songwriter. I was always the front man in bands and writing a lot of the music, obsessing over lyrics and that kind of thing. And when I reapproached music for round 2, I wanted to try making music without words. And something I had always wanted to do was make like a post-rock record, something very much in the "this will destroy you," explosions in the sky realm. And so I thought, well, heck, I'll just jump back in and try that out. So long story short, I made a record called Voyager that released the very end of 2019. And as I was making that record, at first, a weird pedal for me was like a Strymon Big Sky, oh my God, cloud reverb. This is crazy. And then things just progressively got a little bit weirder, until one day I set my hands on a hologram, Infinite Jets, and that thing just cracked my skull wide open. I had no idea what was happening, but I really loved those kind of left field, off the wall sounds, and I wanted more.
Right. Absolutely.
I wanted to keep going down the path that I now understand as familiar sounds processed in unfamiliar ways. And so, long story short, that eventually led to picking up a mono Norns, which is, for your listeners who have never interfaced with that device, it's like a little sound computer with 3 buttons and 3 knobs. It's based on a Raspberry Pi, and it runs a custom code stack. And there's a community, a really brilliant community of artists and engineers who code scripts for this thing, and it can do all kinds of stuff. But one of the things it can do is process audio in different ways. And a few of the scripts on that device just really captivated me, and sent me down the path of even weirder sounds. And if you listen to that record, you can like you can hear it's happening almost in sequence. Like the first 4 or 5 songs are pretty standard post rock tunes, and then things just kind of start veering off and going off the rails. So it's fun to go back and listen to for me, because I can go, oh, that's where I got the Infinite Jest. Oh, hello there, and the Norns has entered the picture.
Right.
And over the next year or two, modular gradually came into the picture, because that's how the sickness works. That's how the disease progresses. Eventually somebody says, hey kid, have you tried clouds? And it's all downhill from there.
Yeah, I mean, that's so interesting. Like, there's like a million things that you said that are like, oh, I want to talk about that and talk about that. But we have a pretty similar way into this stuff. And then also, like, I have, and I've talked about it on here and on Instagram a little bit, but I have recently been kind of coming out the other end of that, burnout and, taking focus off of music as much. And so, I mean, for me, I was still doing pedal videos and everything, but that was like my only time that I really played guitar for, a year or two, was when I was sitting down to learn the pedals and then do the demos. And so, it's what I like about pedals is they can take you out of that space of like, oh, I have to figure out the right chord progression. And, then it was, like you're saying, with even when you find that like first interesting reverb, and it's like, oh, maybe I don't even need a chord progression. Like the reverb is the interesting part. Right. And then you find all this other stuff that's like, well, this is just beyond like what I thought about what music like was or could be. But, it's still somewhat rooted in that, like, I was also kind of inspired by the post-rock stuff, and, that's all, it's all still rooted in, even the weirdest of the guitar-based post-rock is rooted in rock music. And then I stopped myself. I know I can get a bit obsessive with my hobbies, and I actually bought some Eurorec gear once and then immediately returned it and said, I can't do this.
You stood on the edge of the chasm and you survived, is what I hear you saying. You walked away with your life and your limbs.
Yeah, and then it's just
good for you.
It scarred my brain, because I still think like once a month, should I just like, without even trying anything or research anything, just buy a whole rack, like a whole system,
Just
like I have
just
that
cash
urge
it in, baby.
to just jump all the way in. And yeah, I had to stop myself, because I was thinking about what else I should buy before I even learned the stuff that I got.
Yeah.
Like I was spending more time on modular grid than I was with the modules that I just got. And I said, that's not good. I don't have the money for this. And, thankfully was able to only lose my return shipping, on the investment. But
yeah, the hard part about modular grid is building a little system, and then there's a tool at the bottom of it that tells you how much that system would cost, MSRP, and that'll stop your heart.
Yes. I mean, it's a nice deterrent in some ways.
Yep. Yes, it is.
But so, I mean, the way you talked about sorry, I'm now just picturing a bunch of different modules and things that I don't understand, and I forgot the name of the one that the Raspberry Pi based one that you started off with.
Norns.
Yeah. In my head, I was like mashing up that and modular grid, and it was like Morns, and I knew that wasn't right. But
Norns is, I believe they're the Norse version of the Fates.
Oh,
You know,
interesting.
as in Greek mythology, the Norns are kind of the Norse spinners of fate. And it's a fun name for this device, which, you know, if I'm looking at it right now, it's basically like it's a little battery powered standalone computer
Right.
that has no branding on it. There's no writing, no labels. It is a completely mysterious thing because it's an open ended platform and you can basically code it to do whatever you want it to do, you know,
Right.
which is a blessing and a curse. But when I got the Norns, it came in the mail, and this is back in the day. The documentation is wonderful now. It is a very new project when I jumped in, which was not wise. It came, you unboxed it, and inside there was a little card that showed you how to turn on the power and a poem, and that was it.
Wow.
And I got so angry. So it's like, now you have to tell me how to use this thing. But it was a very strong, you know, statement from Mono, the maker of the device. Like, you're going to have to find your own way with this, and what you put into it is what you're going to get back out of it. And I found that really rewarding to kind of approach not only that device, but lots of musical devices that I don't understand and that confuse me, and kind of approaching them humbly and listening for what they can teach me.
Right.
And, you know, working through the frustration of feeling like you're working with mittens on your hands. It makes, you know, it's kind of like, you know, how some of your favorite records are the records that the first time through you were like, meh, I guess that was okay. And then for some reason you listen to
Right.
it again, you're pulled back in, and eventually you're like, oh wow, this is phenomenal. It just took 10 listens
Yeah.
to unpack mentally everything that's going on. Um, I really enjoy instruments and processing devices that are kind of like that too.
Yeah. I kind of wonder, just in how you're describing how the Norns specifically works, like that in comparison to, you know, that being your evolution out of guitar focused gear into just general music gear with the goal of, you know, kind of the more ambient stuff. If it's, you know, like, you know, with any pedals, unless you're sending some other instrument through, which, you know, I'm sure is possible with all of the you know, Norns and any other kind of modular stuff
Mm-hmm.
and whatnot. But unless you're all you're doing is sending a signal through it, and so it's only changing an input that you still have to control in some, or, you know, have
Right.
like an ownership of in some way.
Yeah,
And so
very much so.
like was part of the freedom being able to have, like, you know, I guess when I picture modular, which I know Norns is related to modular gear, but is also not necessary. Like, it is also a standalone thing. It can have
Yeah.
CV outputs, right? But it also can
So
function solo.
there, to jump into the weeds a little bit, because we promised everyone we would. Uh, Norns itself doesn't output CV, but they make a Eurorack module called Crow, which is kind of a companion. And
I
basically,
see.
Crow is just 4/8 inch jacks and a USB port, and that USB port connects to Norns. And again, those scripts that you can write can tell Crow what to do with those control voltage inputs and outputs. So it's really cool because you can use Crow to interface with all kinds of stuff. Your computer, you know, like pedals. If you're sending a pedal board into
Right.
Norns, it's a really neat tool that is totally underutilized in my own music, but it's just one. It's like one more side quest that that I always am like, I gotta go do that, and then you know, you know how it goes. Something else
Yeah.
pops up.
Um, yeah. So it's like, it sounds like you can, you know, what I kind of picture is that it's like your input signal can also affect or be affected by the effects that are, they're affecting the audio, but they can also then interact with what's creating the input.
Yes.
In a way that, unless you have some elaborate like feedback resonator system coming from a pedal onto an input into your guitar, there, is no way that you can ever get that back and forth. And so that's kind of, that to me is the like allure of leaving just strictly guitar and pedals. And so I guess I kind of wonder about how that has all sort of like shaped like where you've gone musically or like how you approach things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The weird thing for me is like, to a certain degree, I don't know, a lot of people might disagree with this, but for the most part, I'm misusing a lot of the tools that I have in the studio because the vast majority of music being made with synthesizers is dance music, is,
Right.
house music, techno. Those lineages to a great degree inform the choices that manufacturers make about these instruments. And I don't make that kind of music. I have an appreciation for it, but it's not what typically comes out of my practice.
Yeah.
So I kind of find myself struggling against a lot of the tools in a healthy and productive way. And it's kind of fun to like push a module or a pedal into territory that it was not designed to occupy, because you get these happy accidents. And I think that that curiosity and that spirit can apply to any instrument, and especially guitar itself. If you look at the heritage of like prepared guitar techniques,
Yeah.
there's a whole world of sound within that instrument that isn't typically presented in rock and country and in blues. And I think that the same idea is running through both of those practices. Like, there's a sound in my head, or there's a question I have, or a curiosity. Let's see if I can accomplish it with this instrument, this piece of equipment, purely by virtue of it being the thing that is in front of me.
Right.
And not because it's the best tool for the job.
Yeah. I mean, I think myself and probably a lot of people listening to this maybe push up against the edge of that without leaving the, familiar, staying in a like traditional music scale or tuning system, traditional ways of playing the instrument, but still trying to push or abuse the pieces that come after to become something that's different, or that at least evokes something different. And yeah, I think it's kind of, I don't want to necessarily get us off track, but I've been
Oh, please do.
the main thing that I, when I had just said, like, I guess in hindsight, me saying to you, we can talk about CV on this podcast. It's like, that's pretty vague. But what I meant is, like, there's a lot of CV now coming, like being compatible with what would be the expression jack on pedals and things like
Yeah.
that. And yeah, I'm kind of like, it's interesting to me how things are becoming more like almost welcoming more that, pushing and, finding what the pedal's not supposed to do. But at the same
Yeah.
time, there was actually a previous episode where Lee from Leems Industries, who makes all the like kind of bizarre expression pedals that are like, like I think he has one that's like a door stopper that, wobbles, and then that is what,
Oh, fun.
like the light sensing through the center of the door stopper. So like the interruptions in light, that the movement, that's the expression signal. And that stuff's
Oh,
really neat.
that is neat.
Yeah, and that's like kind of the guitar friendly version of doing something, like what you're doing almost. And he explained to me like, I never even touch expression. And we talked about just
Hmm.
the concept of expression and like how to, how like interacting with pedals can be deeper through like, those kinds of exterior things, especially when you let it be out of your control. And yeah, I guess it's like, I wonder, because you still do a lot with pedals. You do a lot of videos where you're using pedals with,
Hmm.
a synth or your modular gear or whatever. And like, yeah, I guess I'm curious like how that all combines for you. How like the
Hmm.
particularly in the CV controlling things, but just how it all goes from being like sound through effect to speaker to something that's
Yeah.
a bit more like knotted together, a bit more convoluted.
Yeah. So I think that a really important philosophical distinction to draw between control voltage modulation in the modular synth world, which is really just a way of saying, hey, we want some of these knobs, some of these parameters to move on their own without me having to use my fingers to move them. And maybe I want them to move in a repeated way. And from this point to that point, uh, all, you know, with different waveforms that are clocked to the same BPM so that they're doing different things, but it feels coherent.
Right.
That's a very standard use of modulation and control voltage in the Eurorack world. Whereas, as a guitar player, it feels like to me, the idea with expression was always like, you've got point A and point B,
Yeah.
and this tool right here is going to allow you to kind of preset more, for lack of a better analogy, between this sound and that sound, or to like control one parameter that's highly expressive in a way that is in sync with your music because your hands are quite busy. um I'm like you, man. I never really had a huge use for expression because I was always singing and playing at the same time. And by the time I got into my current musical adventures, I usually have pedals up on the table,
Right.
and I'm operating them with my hands. So it is very exciting now that most pedals that you know you and I are messing with have an option to receive control voltage, because a lot of the uh, modules designed to output modulation, whether standard waveforms like a sine wave, it's going to move stuff up and down, or like way off in the left field, like a module that is designed to detect small electrical changes in the leaves of plants. And you put
Yeah.
sticky pads on your house plant, and it's going to send control voltage out based on what's happening with your house plant. It's like that is the range of modulation sources available in the Eurorack world. It's really exciting to take some of those more esoteric control sources and apply them to pedals that are not expecting that, or that are expecting it, but like it's not what was necessarily in the designer's mind. You can get into some really fun territory. Um, I think especially with like really gnarly dirt pedals, uh, which
Yeah.
I think we probably both, I'm going to open the drawers here, have an affinity for. Um, but yeah, so that is very exciting. I think what I probably still struggle with, and I don't know that anybody has really come up with a solution for this, probably because it's not actually an issue. Uh, it's just like in the Eurorack world, you know, every parameter usually is modulatable. So if a module has 10 knobs, it's going to have 10 jacks that you can plug 10 cables into to send
Right.
10 different control voltage sources so that you can have control over those knobs. And just by way of the kind of interface of pedals where you don't have all those jacks, the standard for how you control those knobs is just different from manufacturer to manufacturer, and it can be hard to remember, and hard to see what's happening, you know.
Right. I mean, even with
So that
like the idea of CV versus expression, because they ultimately, do that same thing of twisting a knob or morphing from
mhm,
one preset to another, but they're two different ways of transmitting the voltage, and so it gets confusing of,
yeah,
does this jack do, is it looking for expression or is it looking for CV, or is it switchable to look
yep,
for either, and how that affects what the result is. um,
yeah.
I mean,
Does
it's
it
the
want
same way with
5
MIDI
volts or
and pedals.
3.3 volts?
Yeah, right. And it's like, as somebody who's already not skeptical of like how it can work, but it's not in my workflow. It's interesting to me, but it's not something that's like I'd have to learn how to make it all work. It's another hurdle of, well, maybe I shouldn't spend the time learning on how to make it all work and do the cool things, because I don't even know if I'll buy the right CV
Right.
source that can control the pedals that I want to use. Or maybe it only works with two of my pedals on my pedal board and not the other two I want to use. And, it gets a little
Yeah,
confusing.
and you have to ask yourself, like, is the juice worth the squeeze? There is
Right.
the result of all of that work going to result in a better experience for me as a musician? Because what I often do, and I think a lot of people do, is kind of go down these obsessive rabbit trails, and I have to pull myself back out and go, what you're doing right now is not making music.
Right.
you're you just invented a problem for yourself to solve in the technical realm, and nothing will come of it except spending money and wasting time that you could have just spent using that pedal. You just turn the knobs.
Right.
Just turn the knobs, man.
Right. Yeah. That's something I've talked about before with, guitar gear specifically. Of, I think a lot of people who are into pedals are more interested in the messing around and creating problems to then figure out how to solve it. And then, that whole cycle as something fun and not always relating to the
Totally.
end goal of music, which, I certainly have been for, parts of my life. And I think that's a totally valid thing to do, but it depends on what you want. And if what you want is making music, then a lot of these things, it's like, I guess, kind of, there's sort of a weird middle ground with pedals of, you can do all these really interesting things, but you have those roadblocks in kind of any direction that maybe is going to get
Hmm.
you that like few $1,000 price tag to solve your problem by going all the way into Eurorack or keyboard synths, or all kinds of different,
Yeah.
like very expensive amps that break up in a more pleasing way.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think, there's a lot of times I'll get comments on my videos of like, you know, wanting to make like synth sounds, or wanting to, introduce more randomness, or, all like different kinds of things that are elements of other paths you could take with gear. And it's kind of like, where's that line of what makes that like just go and do that thing, or here's a fun way that you can get partway there and maybe embrace some of the limitations of pedals and things like that.
Do you ever get to the point, I'll do this sometimes, where like if you have invented some kind of technical challenge for yourself or some problem, like, oh no, the gizmo is not doing the widget thing and it needs to. Do you ever find that like once you've gone through the obsessive cycle of figuring out how to make it work and you finally are victorious, you kind of lose interest?
Yeah.
You can
right.
Oh wait, now the problem's solved.
Yeah, it's a puzzle.
What do I do now?
I rarely go back to do a puzzle a second time,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, for one band that I play in that's now, the classic, everybody has full-time jobs and is busy, and so we never practice thing. But technically, we're still an active band. I have a pedal board that's, I've got like 5 different fuzzes on it, and they're all so I can do like change all the textures between different parts and different songs depending on different things. And the best I ever sounded with that band was a practice when I showed up and my power supply for my pedal board wasn't working. And so I had an extra one spot and just plugged in one distortion pedal into a nice amp at the practice space. And it just sounded, it was just on or off, and I could play lighter or heavier. And that solved that whole problem. But, there's like those fun things of like, is someone in the audience going to notice this? Maybe. Is it going to make me play different?
Right.
That's more likely if it interacts with you differently. And then that might result in a different end result or experience for the listener. But yeah, it's like I've been working on like I said earlier, I kind of have sort of gone through that similar burnout phase of I haven't worked on music by myself for a while. And I wasn't listening to music as much. And recently I've been working on a score for a short documentary that my partner's making, and it's all
Scream,
just
right?
Yes, the Wilhelm Scream, and it's really like she put it together with these reference tracks that she edited to that are from like Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, and from like I don't know if you saw the movie Blackberry that came out last year. But that had a really amazing score.
Okay.
Really interesting. It was so cool. The guy who did the music used a lot of like cell phone sounds, like kind of dial up internet tone thing, and like glitching cell phone connection sounds in this movie that's about the evolution of talking on the phone.
I love that.
So yeah, I definitely recommend the movie, but the score is like just amazing. And so sitting down to work on this score that I'm trying to make with those reference tracks, it's been like all just one synth, and then messing with pedals, or maybe this just doesn't, maybe it's just like whatever's within the synth, but like having the focus of not like, oh, I'm trying to make like what I think will be the best rig to do this goal. It's just like kind of quick and dirty. Let me get these ideas out there, and then I can polish them later. And then I have realized the first cue I did in the score, I used a whole bunch of pedals, sending stuff out for my interface to go back through them and doing all kinds of stuff. And then the stuff that I've worked on later has like 3 tracks, and it's like one track of just me playing the synth and only the built-in delay that's on the synth, and then
Mm-hmm.
one track of sending that same recording through Paul Stretch to make it just like a wash of kind of like unrecognizable frequencies, and it's like that's all I need,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's like I've like in trying to do things, like get ideas out, I basically did what you're saying of got rid of the whole problem, and I was like, oh wait, I didn't need to have this whole thing of like, should I go through, but I've only been using Lossy because I've been trying to do like a tape for tying into older parts of, like analog sound history, and
Yeah.
then Lossy for kind of newer, when like
Mm-hmm.
sound for movies moved over to digital kind of stuff. But other than that, it was like, I like doing this stuff and it gets me to come up with ideas, but in the end, can kind of forget to use it. And then at the end be like, oh, I guess I didn't miss not having it there.
Right. Do you find that I've haven't done much scoring work, but do you find that having picture to work against kind of focuses that impulse to throw a bunch of gear at something? Do you think that that's part of it? Like, because when you're scoring something, you kind of know if what you're doing is working or not, and you kind of know what the
Right.
scene maybe needs emotionally, and the answer is not always a bunch of stuff. Sometimes it's like, no, it just needs this tiny bit of reinforcement of what's happening in the scene. And I wonder
Yeah.
if that's part of the equation.
I hadn't really thought about that, but I guess it does, at least in the sense of like, one thing I have learned I struggle with that kind of was part of the, leading to the burnout, was just a complete blank slate is difficult to work with. And so
Yeah.
having some limitations is like helpful to get started. And once I'm started, I can keep going and I can always fix something, but I can't like stop having the idea because it's already there.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I wonder if it's like, okay, I see, like, I know this could be played a few different ways. Like, with the documentary, it's a lot of kind of ambiguous emotions. It's not quite as like, this is a sad moment, this is like a triumphant moment. It's
Yeah.
sort of like,
All right.
there's a lot of complex human emotions here from multiple different people. And so kind of trying to play like in sort of the vague space. And so like there's still a goal there, even if it's not super defined. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, it kind of like, then I don't have to be like, well, if I use this delay pedal, it's going to give this, feeling where, I mean, I'm still doing that a little bit of having tape sounds and digital glitch sounds. But, I think it's like, I'm sure you would probably agree to this, that at a certain point, it becomes ingrained in just how your brain works. And you can do more
Yeah.
or less of how much do you want to focus on the gear.
Yeah. Yes. Definitely so. And I think also there are there are those pieces of gear that we've spent more time with that feel like an appendage,
Yeah.
where it's all muscle memory, and you can play that pedal like an instrument, um, and it's not occupying the thinking parts of your brain. Those are left open to to interpret those emotions and make decisions about the piece you're working on. And you look down at your hands and you go, oh, whoa, you were still working. Mood is like that for me. Like at this
Yeah.
point, like the amount of throw on the clock knob that constitutes an octave is just automatic for me. You know,
Right.
I can swing through all the octaves without hitting a fifth, just because I've done it 5,000 times at this point. It's not something I have to think about. And it's really cool there are not a lot of pieces of equipment that I'm there with, but it's really nice to get to that place with an instrument
Yeah.
or a pedal. Because to be honest, like I never had the dexterity or stubbornness or focus to get there with the guitar itself. You know,
Right.
I was never, and I'm still not like a terribly technically proficient guitar player or a very good student of music theory. So a lot of thinking has always had to go into my guitar playing when I'm doing anything other than playing chords.
Yeah.
But I found that for whatever reason, like vibe management and using the studio as an instrument is something that feels way more natural to me. And I kind of always know what I want, and I know when I've gotten it out of a pedal or a module. And it's been neat to find that in my late 30s. You
Right.
know, I don't know that I was expecting to find new avenues at this point in my life and my musical journey. So it's been really refreshing to go like, oh wow, that's a whole piece of my identity as a musician and producer now that I didn't even know existed, really, because I was so focused on writing songs with lyrics,
Right.
um, and on like obsessing over the difference between these two models of electric guitar, that I kind of missed this entire universe that I was really wired up to enjoy and to navigate well.
Yeah. And I mean, that's, I think it's the thing that we always don't think will happen to us, but then everybody sort of experiences it, of just being able to say like, oh, I'm going to focus on this thing instead now, even though I was, focused on something else for so long. Like
Yeah.
I like got into music because of punk music and going to
Hmm.
hardcore shows, and it's very, very different than ambient music. And
Yeah.
like they kind of are like opposite ends of the spectrum. And still it's like, well, this makes sense, and I can bounce back and forth a little bit,
I don't
but
know, Ian. I don't know. It kind of like how the unsaid rules, like the best producers are drummers for some reason. Like I'm scrolling through my Rolodex here and I'm thinking like some of my best ambient guitar friends are also people that came from the like hardcore punk metal, like those where you might be onto something here. We may
interesting.
have just unearthed a truth of lineage
Yeah, maybe we should start
right here on the
a
show.
my my bio on Twitter, which I no longer use, and Facebook, which I no longer use, was for like the last 5+ years, aging punk who like I forget something, did so, like bought a pair of Adidas and started making ambient music or something like that. And maybe we should have a like aging punk making ambient music secret society.
Like you either die a hardcore musician or live long enough to make ambient music kind of notion.
Yeah. Wow, interesting. I know one other person like that. The other Matt from Ambient Trash, and even then
Oh yes.
he still like is kind of in the like you know post-hardcore, like a bit more guitar
Oh
focused
yeah.
thing, but with all the like dabbling in ambient stuff. And so he's the only other person. I mean, I shouldn't say only other person. I'm sure there are people who I'm not thinking of because they're not like gear people. But that's a very interesting hypothesis.
Yeah, the person who came to mind for me was Andy Othling.
Oh
I
yeah,
love Andy,
right.
and you're like, if Andy posts a story, there's a 50-50 shot on whether or not it's going to be like beautifully emotive ambient guitar, or like, is screamo still a word that people use?
Yeah.
I, I lack the vocabulary to properly describe hardcore music, but
Right.
it's one of those two things.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know why I
So
didn't
the
think of
linkage
that,
is real.
because Andy and my strong bond is through Limp Bizkit and new metal. And so,
Yes.
there you go, right there. Um, but yeah, I'm actually curious because I'd never heard anybody say this before. Like, what's the idea behind drummers make the best producers?
I have just noticed that, like, all for whatever reason, like, all of my favorite, not all, but it tends to be the case that your pals who end up being really good studio engineers, for whatever reason, have always come up as drummers.
Interesting.
Um,
Yeah.
and my theory is that to be a great drummer, it's kind of like being a center on the offensive line. Like, you kind of need to know what everybody else's job is,
Right.
and whether or not they're doing a good job. And that's what a good producer is doing in the studio too.
Yeah.
My friend Dustin Ragland comes to mind. And then Joshua Van Tassel, also, who I work with a lot these days. Just like, they're just these human vessels of tone and taste. And they're always great drummers too. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Uh,
I
this
mean,
is,
the great
you know,
drummers I've played with, um, like the drummer I played with the most is a friend of mine named Brian, and we were in a couple different bands together. And he's never saying like, oh, maybe like change this guitar thing or whatever. Like, we're only ever talking structurally, but it's clear.
mm-hmm.
It's like he's figuring out that, like, if everything else is working, so that like, because I guess the drummer is the only person doing what a drummer does, where the
Right.
guitarist is sitting somewhat similarly in the same space as the bassist and the vocalist and any
Right.
other member of the band. And so the drummer is like, I got to do my part so good because otherwise it's noticeable. And to do that, you
Right.
like it took me a while. I at one point, trying to make more music on my own, studied drummers that I like, or not necessarily drummers that I like, but like songs with drums that I like, a lot, just to understand like what is, like, how do people play the drums beyond the very standard, like,
Yeah.
four, like straight ahead, four on the floor, like rock beats. Um, and so it's like, maybe what I'm thinking is a guitarist doesn't always understand what the drummer does, but the drummer kind of has to
Mm-hmm.
understand, maybe not the actual like harmonic content of it, but still understand what the guitarist is doing.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the drummer's holding the biggest paintbrush in terms of influencing the the overall energy of the song. And so the best drummers are wielding that brush really tastefully and
Yeah.
kind of owning that power with a lot of respect for it, and not abusing it. And I think that's true for great record producers
Yeah.
too. Like, knowing where to push and where to not push, and where to challenge people, and where to not say anything.
Right.
It's not a rule that's universally true by any means, but it's been true enough for me enough times that it kind of, like, I notice. I was like, man, what is the deal with that? That's a thing. I don't know that I fully understand why, but
Yeah.
it's apparently a thread.
I mean, two good hypotheses from you. So If at their face,
You're buying
I
it.
don't disagree with them. They make sense, and so I think you are onto something. I think maybe you should come up with a whole list or book of just the blank is the best blank, and see where that takes
Yes.
you.
Put that out on YouTube and just make some popcorn
Yes, right. But I
and
like
watch the
ambient
internet
music,
eat
and I never
itself.
listened to punk music in my life.
You're wrong, Jerry.
So, maybe to kind of wrap things up, I wanted to ask you. You had said in kind of your first, talking about, kind of overview of everything that we've been talking about. You said
Mhm.
something about using familiar sounds in unfamiliar ways. And I really like that enough to write it down to make sure that we talked about it. Is that so? Do you feel like that's like a way that you now approach all music? Like even if you're sitting down with the
Yeah.
guitar and you're just
Yeah.
gonna kind of pluck things out, it's
Yeah.
still like, what could I do differently?
Yes. Absolutely. Like, still, the moments that feel really magical to me when I'm working on music or just playing around are like when you take a piano or a guitar or a violin or the human voice is a great piece, material source, and send that through interesting processes, play with its transients and mess
Yeah,
with, its pitch, but not so much that it stops being itself.
right.
Um, because I find that our ear is so good at recognizing what the rest of the sound is going to be if we just hear that initial attack transient,
Right.
like you can tell the difference between a plucked banjo string and a piano string being hit by the hammer and guitar being strummed in like 100th of a second, because your brain is this incredible prediction machine and has heard those sounds before. And so I love trying to find where that limit is, and where the sound can feel like something new and something unexplored and that we haven't heard before, but still kind of retain this sonic coziness because you are familiar with that sound.
Yeah.
You do know that that's a piano.
Right.
It's just not, it's just, it's obscured in a way that is interesting and kind of engages your curiosity. It makes you think about what it is. Um, Early on in my journey, that meant lots of effects, and that was fun. That is something people should do. And then these days, it's more like, how can I, jump into the DNA of that sound and like
Right.
rearrange it? And when does it stop being itself? And is that cool, or is it like, oh well, now it's just a sine wave.
Right.
Everything is sine wave at a certain
Yeah.
point.
Right. Like the
But yeah,
sampling.
I love doing that.
Um, yeah, that's kind. Yeah, it's like, what's the line between the like sampling a whatever, like a I don't know. There's the YouTubers that do that where they like just sample a water bottle and make a whole track, and the bass is just a like repeating sine wave, and
Uh,
it. I mean, I cannot make a good bass sound out of a really small repeating sine wave that I loop from a larger audio file. But so
yeah.
it's still really fascinating, but it's functionally a different sound, as opposed to,
Yep.
like, I've been not to talk about the Wilhelm scream too much, but one thing I am really excited about, and hopefully when it's done and available in some way, I can kind of make a video showing some of the stuff I did in the score, because there's or this thing particularly, but I've used the granular synth in Reason to like actually use the scream itself and make tonal synth patches out of
Yeah.
it.
Yes.
And so it's like it has the timbre, like the kind of identifiable texture of that sound, but it isn't that sound.
Right.
And that's why I've been somewhat obsessed, and maybe I overuse Paul stretch for the same reason of it's just so nice to stretch something to an unrecognizable degree.
Yeah.
But it still sounds like the thing that it was.
Yep. One of my favorite like lowercase musicians is a guy named Steve Roden. And for a long time, what Steve would do is he would show up to the venue. This is like early 90s.
Yeah.
Show up to the venue and record just different textures and materials, like tapping on a bar, like his footsteps, crunching a leaf. And then a few hours later, he would play the show with only those sounds. So it was like the audience is being immersed in the sound of the space that they're sitting in. And there are these beautiful compositions that you can just kind of bathe yourself in. And I just love that at a philosophical level. And I love what you're doing with the Wilhelm scream too, because it's like this thing is wearing itself in a certain sense. Like it's wearing something that has been woven out of its own DNA. And that's really cool.
Yeah. That's it like almost kind of becomes 433 at a certain point of like, what is the sound being played and what is the sound of the environment, being played back, but it is also just like someone can be tapping on the bar at the same time that the tapping on the bar sound is played, and they kind of become the same thing.
Are you familiar with that piece that's like I am standing in a room?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Where they play a sound in a space. So you've got speakers in a room and a microphone at the other end of the room, and you play a piano chord and you record that, and then you play that recording back through the speakers and into the microphone. You just keep doing that.
Yeah.
And eventually what you've got is just the tone of the room itself, because the resonance of the room is going to eat in the sound. I've always wanted to do that.
Yeah.
It's so wildly impractical.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much, in college, I went to school for music technology. And in New York. And so I had like kind of exposure to some of the people who were kind of become professors and were the lingering bits of those like experimental scenes. And so like I went to one art or sound installation that was, I don't remember how exactly they did it, but it was an array of speakers playing tones, and you are meant to walk throughout the room, and the tones you hear change, and there'll be pockets where you hear multiple and pockets where you hear nothing or just one.
Oh, fun.
Because, they like, however the speakers are set up, they're like almost creating like a woven kind of thing where like they're literally just like beams of one tone, and you can walk in between all these different, like notes one by one.
Oh, that's fun.
And stuff like that. And yeah, I mean, it's like that stuff's fascinating. And I think it exists to a degree in some of the like, ambient music and experimental music that's happening now. We just have all this gear that, we don't have to invent ways to do things necessarily. But yeah, it does kind of like, it's become less esoteric for the most part and more grounded in the things.
Yep. Well said. Well said.
Well, I think that's a pretty good place to wrap things up. And so, thank you, Matt, for, joining us for this podcast episode. This has been really great. Oh, wait. I knew there was one more thing I wanted to ask you. If you could, just off the top of your head, a non-all-inclusive list of things that maybe someone who was listening to this and is interested in those types of processing, not as an effect, but in like interacting with a sound ways. If someone was to step outside of pedals, like you can do some of that with a looper or with mood or, a couple different tools, but
Yeah.
like that entry level, doing something different with sounds.
Yeah.
What would
Yeah,
you
certainly.
think?
So if you have any people listening to this who are Ableton Live suite owners, the top tier of Ableton, there is a Max for Live device in Ableton called Pitch Loop 89, which is created by Robert Hankey, who was one of the founders of Ableton and goes under the moniker Mono Lake as a musician. And it is a beautiful audio buffering device. You can change the sample rate of the audio, get down into these like really crunchy places, but it's always recording like 4 to 6 second buffer. And then it has two playheads that you can kind of automate with LFOs. And then you can tell it what size grains you want to play back. And you already have that if you have Ableton Suite.
Right.
And it's one of my favorite processing tools, period. It's really beautiful. The other place, hardware wise, the first module that I got my hands on that just made me giggle because it was such a wonderfully musical experience is the Instruo Arbor, Arbhar. It's a Scottish company. And it's technically a granular module, but it's incredibly musical. And I find that anything you put into it just kind of comes back better. And it's a great, great starting place for exploring the process of like putting a sound into a thing and having the thing spit something back at you that is made of that sound, but has been rearranged to a certain degree and feels different. I would probably point people toward those two places. And the biggest thing is just to like find a song or a process that kind of speaks to you and just be curious and tug on that thread. It's all out there on the internet. You just have to find, go tell the algorithm you want to get weird with music and it'll take you to the right places.
Yeah.
I did a video on my YouTube channel called, it was like modular synthesis for guitarists. But if anybody's interested in kind of making that jump, in that video, it's a few years old now, but I basically just kind of approach modular concepts from a guitar player's point of view. So that might be a fun thing to check out also.
Yeah, definitely. I'll leave the link for that in the description. So yeah, I mean, even just I have a little less expertise in this, but I would say even just a sampler, a software one or a hardware one, just being able to start a sound at something that isn't the beginning, the onset of the sound. That is such a small change, but it does do wonders in kind of like you were saying earlier, removing those preconceived things, like almost what becomes like auto recognition for our brains of like, oh yeah, that's a guitar or a banjo, and then we fill in the rest of the sound. And so you can kind of push out of that.
Do you remember the first
tools.
time you heard a piano played backwards, like a recording of a piano played backwards or guitar?
Right.
You're like, oh,
yeah,
it's that. It's just that emotion, that the quest to keep finding those moments, I think, is all it is for me.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. That is the perfect way to end things. So I'll say if anyone is listening to this on Patreon, Matt and I are going to record a additional bonus episode that'll be out in 2 weeks. And if you're listening to this on YouTube, that means that bonus episode's already out and you can listen to it right this moment. If you sign up for my Patreon for as little as $1 a month, or I think I've allowed free Patreon members to be a thing. That's something new that Patreon's doing. So I think you might even be able to listen to it for free if you would like to. So, all that will be linked. And thank you for listening, and thank you for supporting my channel and, the Patreon if you are. And Matt, do you have any plugs? Tell people where they can find you and your music and your videos.
So on Instagram, let's see, I think I'm just Matt Lowery, MattLowery. And then on YouTube, I believe I'm Matt Lowery Music. Very clever. And I think everything that I've put out is on all streaming platforms, but Bandcamp is my favorite place to send people because it's a place where you can hear it in the highest fidelity. I've got 4 records there, and then another one should be out in about a month.
Oh, cool.
Or so. But yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, definitely everybody go check that out. Listen to what's already there. And if you're listening to this while it's on YouTube, which is in 2 weeks from when we're recording this, that means it's a little less than a month until that new album. So it's even closer. Well, thank you, Matt, for doing this. And thank you, everyone, for listening.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.